Awesome. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us. Of course, as you already know, this is Leadership Fellows New York. We are doing a leadership conversation on work-family balance today. This topic came up as a natural kind of point of discussion among a lot of the fellows. As you can imagine, everybody in the nonprofit sector is struggling with some form of work-family balance at this time. And so we wanted to have an open discussion about it, an open conversation. Our initial concept of this conversation was to have more panelists, more, people at the front of the room giving advice. But as we really dove into this topic, we realized that that's not really what people need when it comes to this topic, because everybody has their own special set of circumstances. What people really need is to be able to dive in to their circumstances and discuss what does and does not work for them. That being said, I am Shell. I'm the Administrative Director for Leadership Fellows New York. All pronouns welcome. They, them is what I've got displayed. And it's my pleasure to very shortly will introduce you all to the panelists we have today, as well as my team. Maya, Michael, Janae, if you could all just give a little wave. Hi, everybody. Good morning. So glad to have your support today. So once again, I'm just going to repeat the instructions that we have for today. I already see some of you are having wonderful discussions in the chat, but as we're getting settled, just want you to please consider and feel free to openly discuss what are some of the challenges that you face in maintaining a balance between your workplace, your personal life, and your family. Again, we don't have too much time, so we do have later on today an exercise that we will demonstrate that will involve the use of Jamboard. So Janae, if I could ask you to just show everybody the Jamboard that we'll be using real quick.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So we'll be using Jamboard this afternoon, and it is a digital whiteboard that is used through Google. So I'll demo it for you right here. So this is what it looks like, and this is one of the questions that will be focused on in one of the breakout groups. So what you can do here is a few things. You can use a sticky note, for example, and you can type something in, and it will just appear on the board right here. So you can leave comments and questions here. Feel free to do that. And there are several of them here that you will all be assigned to later on in the session.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Janae. And so as you all saw, each of the slides on Jamboard has a different question. I will explain that whole exercise later on when we get to it, but I just wanted you all to see it and be aware that we're going to be using Jamboard today, and we're going to be in breakout rooms later on. So that all being established, I would very much like to introduce you to... Sorry, just looking at something real quick. I would like to introduce you all to Sequoya and Brian, who are joining us as our panelists for today. I could introduce them both, but I think it makes more sense for them to introduce themselves. So Sequoya, could you start? Would you just kindly introduce yourself to everybody?
Definitely. Thank you all so much. I'm excited to be here. My name is Sequoya Hayes. I use she and her pronouns. I am the founder of my business, Red Linimal Wellness and Consulting, but I wear a number of different hats. I am a therapist, an artist, and I also do some nonprofit consulting. I am based in Anchorage, Alaska. But I do quite a bit of traveling. So right now I am in North Carolina, in Charlotte. And in about a week, I'll be in Durham. Let me think, what else can I say? This is Winnie, my emotional support animal. So, as I take care of myself during this time, please take care of yourselves during this time, whatever that might mean. Um, I think that's all I want to say right now. Is that okay? Do I need to go and say anything more?
No, all of that is,
Okay.
yeah, all of that's wonderful. Thank you for
Okay.
introducing yourself.
Sure.
Sequoia is many things. She's an expert at, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe an expert at kind of advising organizations to focus more on wellness within the organizational structure. Um, could you talk to us a bit about how nonprofits can center employee wellness?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I think the first kind of thing to consider related to centering wellness is to look at your values, as an organization and ensure that there is alignment with your values and then wellness. A lot of times we are in spaces and we, meaning, clearly folks that are utilizing services related to the nonprofit. Um, and there's this language around wellness, but there isn't necessarily like a value or a commitment to that. So, for me, my kind of initial conversation or question is definitely like, how do you embody wellness? Like, it's fine that you talk about it, but what does that actually look like? So how do your policies and procedures actually support wellness? How do your one-on-one supervision kind of sessions or meetings with folks support wellness? Like, how do you create a culture related to wellness? I
Awesome.
think that's
Absolutely.
it. Okay.
Thank you, Sequoia. Yes, absolutely. The main focus for a lot of organizations is how to create that culture. And I'm seeing in the chat right now that a lot of people are mentioning that their organizations do not have that culture. We're seeing, people who are expected to stay after 5 p.m., coworkers who are texting and calling after work hours, childcare being expensive. Let's see, we've got yeah, staff, leadership and senior staff working on weekends. How do we dismantle these things? If that's a question that you want to speak to, Sequoia. If not, we can move
Okay,
on.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I have these conversations, a lot of the times with organizations and then folks that are in leadership roles, I talk a lot about like individual protective factors and then organizational protective factors. So when I say protective factors, I'm talking about, again, like values or commitments that align with supporting the culture of wellness, right? And so for individual protective factors, we talk about how employees or staff are self-aware. So meaning, are you checked in with your nervous system to understand like how you're feeling in the moment? So, in meetings, as you're providing services, are you present or are you disassociated to get through the day? So first starting with self-awareness, how are you doing? Um, Another aspect of individual protective factors would be being able to ask for help and support. So, like one of the challenges for me in answering the question in the chat was, being able to express boundaries, like, no, I can't answer this text message until Monday or until, you know, it's my time to be at work, you know. And does your organization support folks being able to say like, hey, I can't answer this right now. And then on the organizational protective factor side, again, it's about creating those types of relationships where folks feel supported. They don't feel like there's going to be like a backlash, to them saying, no, I can't answer that right now, or just not responding until Monday.
Awesome. Yes, managing that backlash is supremely important. All right, since I want to turn now to Brian, a longtime friend of our program. Brian, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. And can everybody hear me okay?
Looks
Great.
good.
I don't have my earbuds today, so glad the sound is working. Yeah, so I'm Brian Lewis. I am currently the executive director of Rock the Future Alliance, which is a Rochester, New York-based organization working across systems to improve educational outcomes for all the children in Rochester, New York. And prior to that, I was the chief program officer at a New York City-based organization called Exalt Youth that was a grantee of the New York Community Trust. And I'm also a former fellow and also a former fellow staff. So like Shell said, a lot of deep connections to the fellowship. So thank you all for having me today. Shell, I prepared a few remarks, so I could share those now and then get into the questions. Is that?
Yes, would love to hear you.
Great, awesome. And it's not, it's not a speech, just some thoughts, some ideas incoming in today. So I just wanted to sort of frame, the conversation with that. And then I know Shell has prepared some questions, and then, looking forward to also being able to engage with all of you. I should also say too, in addition to my professional roles, I am a father. I have a 14-month-old, and my beautiful baby girl is sleeping in the next room. So I may wake her up because my voice has been known to do that, especially for my own daughter. So if I have to run and get my crying baby and bring her onto the call, just want folks to know that that's part of this work-life balance thing that we're talking about. So I just wanted folks to be prepared for that. You may see me dash out of the room, come back in. I may make it through. We don't know. You're on this journey with me today. It's a wild ride. This is fatherhood. This is what being a leader looks like. This is also part of what I think we all are navigating. Many of us are navigating as we think about this issue of work-life balance. So the first thing I'll say, and some of you may be familiar with this knowledge already, but I was really interested in the concept of work-life balance historically because I'm a history buff. I really like to absorb history, learn about history, and through some really simple research and looking into it, I realized that from really the Industrial Revolution until well into the modern technological age, we did not have a concept of work-life balance. So, here in the United States, in Europe, and most of the Western industrialized countries in the world, everyone from very young children, because we also didn't have protections for children, in the workplace. And I love that Sequoya talked about protective factors. Everyone from very young children up until adults were expected to work 14 to 16-hour days daily. Pretty much from like the late 1700s until the mid 1900s. In fact, it was not until 1940 in the United States with the introduction of the Fair Labor Standards Act that we got the 40-hour work week. And so that, the concept of work-life balance itself as a term, again, through my little preliminary research, I'm not writing a book here on it, but I understand that it can be attributed to the women's liberation, actually, and it first started to appear in the UK in the 1980s. So like so many good things that have come to us in society, it came through the activism of women and those who supported women's rights. And we first started to see that term, work-life balance, in the 1980s. I was born in the 1980s, so it's a relatively recent term. So I'll say all this to say, I just want everyone to stop and think about this for a few minutes. For most of modern history, we have not had work-life balance. We had children and everyone else working in factories, working 14 to 16-hour days. There were no labor unions, there were no protections, there was even no idea that people should not do that. That was the norm. And it's only in very recent history, in many of our own lifetimes, that we even got this idea of a phrase of work-life balance. And for many of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, this thing didn't exist. So, I'm in the business. I know many of you all are in the business of and doing the work of generational change. We talk about like shifting generational patterns, curses even, I've heard people say. So if we're going to have a generational shift in how we think about, work and how we approach our work, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be tough because these are deeply ingrained, longly held historical ideas that we're really fighting against. So I just wanted to start by contextualizing in that way. The idea of an 8-hour workday, weekends off, having a Saturday and Sunday to yourself and to spend time with your family, paid lunch, paid vacation, paid sick days, a lot of the other employee benefits that we all kind of take for granted, many of us, because they're kind of standard and normed, are very recent developments. They're very recent developments. So, and not only that, they're things that people had to fight for. Blood was literally shed. Blood was shed for the right to have many of these things, right? When we talk about like organizing and fighting for these things, the women's liberation movement, the labor movement, racial justice movements, they fought for a lot of those protections, and they have to continue to fight for them. So as we think about how we negotiate these contested notions and ideas in our workspaces, I think it's really important that we remember all of that, and we think about that as we continue to advocate and fight for those things. I'd also like to say that work-life balance is something that will require a radical paradigm shift, given all that I've laid out. And so, often it's thought of as kind of a soft skill or something that's secondary or not as important. I think it's essential. I think if you don't be intentional about work-life balance and the fact that, we have to fight against these things that required us to try to create work-life balance in the first place, then we run the risk of, running ourselves ragged individually, running our organizations into the ground, really destroying morale and culture, amongst staff and amongst the people that we, consider our colleagues. And so it's such a critically important thing to consider and do. And so I'm so glad to see so many of you here on this call interested in this idea. I know many of you have a lot of ideas and insights and thoughts about how to do this, case study examples from your own work. I think this is how we do it, by sharing power across, learnings across, of how we've been able to lead for work-life balance and fight for work-life balance from where we sit within our workplaces, and by sharing in spaces like what we're doing today. I also want to say too, for certain groups such as women and immigrant groups, ancestors of the formerly enslaved, such as myself, I consider myself, I am the ancestor of a formerly enslaved people. The concept of work-life balance is made even more complicated because of harmful and gaslighting stereotypes and misperceptions. So I forgot where I saw this, but it's like the most gaslit thing anyone ever did was to say that Black people are lazy, because Black people literally built the Western society and American society on free labor that was taken away from us. And then this concept began to develop that Black people don't work hard enough, or that we're lazy, right? And that was generated from the South and through Jim Crow and propagated through all kinds of misinformation and propaganda. So you can talk about that as a unique situation, and it is, because it's something that happens specifically to Black people, but we see similar things happening with narratives that have been co-opted across different groups that have been deliberately left out of positions of power. So we see similar, misinformation about women when they take positions of power, right? Or is a woman too pedantic? Is she too bossy? We don't see those kind of critiques of men when they get into those kind of positions. We also see it across immigrant groups too. And again, that's not really the scope of my conversation today, but I thought I would bring that up because it's important. And I think for a lot of us, and especially for myself in my career, this negative self-talk is always in the back of my head. How do I prove myself? How do I demonstrate that I'm good enough? How do I show my value in the workplace? And it's important that we collectively reject those misperceptions, because they can have really lethal consequences for individuals when they're driving their efforts and pushing them to go kind of beyond their own limits. I also think it's important to move from a concept of self-care to a concept of communal care. And so again, just for myself in my career, a lot of times people have sort of wagged the finger at me and said, you work too hard, you don't take enough time off, you don't take enough vacation, what's wrong with you? And I found that to be another element of guilt that was layered upon my already, strong feelings of guilt of missing out on time with family and already working too hard. So instead, let's shift the thinking and say, instead of blaming an individual for not taking enough time off or working too hard, how do we collectively and communally think about designing environments that are advantageous to people having balance between work and life? And so I think this can happen when we recognize our workplaces as not just places of production, but also as sites of learning, and where real relationships can and should be built. I think it's also important that we reject harmful ideology and approaches that lead to the need for the establishment of work-life balance in the first place. And it also has to be culturally relevant, right? So when I talk about communal care, that comes from a way of thinking that is sort of non-Eurocentric, non-industrialized. For those of you who are really interested in this as a historical topic, Angela Davis writes brilliantly about how you can't think about the rise of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution without also recognizing the resources and forced labor that was taken out of Africa, and sort of the underdevelopment of Africa, the East, so much of the world, so that England, the US, and Europe could become industrialized and become the world leaders, right? We have to sort of have a historical and worldview that understands and recognizes those things, because we're still living out that legacy every day in our workplaces, right? And so as leaders, as workers, as individuals, we always have to question and ask ourselves, am I being culturally relevant? Am I reconciling with this harmful history and this harmful past that I've inherited in my workplace and the work that I do? And am I trying to push against that to really build lasting, meaningful bonds that are culturally relevant, that are based in a notion of people over products and people over production? And that's a really hard thing and challenging thing to do, but it's something I think we all have to push ourselves to do from wherever we sit. I also think that embracing JEDI work, and so justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion will help to do that. And many of you have done that and understand why it's important that we push for those kinds of things. Lastly, I'll just say that a lot of research shows that if you do these things, not only will they help create better environments for our workplace and for the people that work within those places, but they do actually improve productivity. And so when you shift your thinking around these things, and you design your workplaces to be like this, and you support, the kinds of things that I've been mentioning in these remarks, we've seen across the board that we also see a production and an increase in production as well. So it's not like you got to choose one or the other, right? You can and should have both. And I think that that's the real the best way to move forward. So I'll stop there. I know I said a lot, and I know Shell has a couple of questions for me.
Wow, thank you, Ryan. I feel like you just single-handedly elevated this conversation from, one on the individual level, how do we manage ourselves, into one on the collective level of how do we change our organizations. I do have questions for you. You know that, but just following on this theme that you brought up, we're seeing in the chat, right? People are struggling with this at their organizations right now. How do they start advocating for themselves in these organizations that don't have the cultures that we're aspiring to?
Yeah, so I think the best way to do this, and the way I've done it in my career, is to make it data informed, right? And so there's a lot of really good resources and articles that are out there that show the last thing that I just mentioned, that this is a false choice, right? It's a false dichotomy between having work-life balance and being productive. The most productive workspaces are workspaces that have work-life balance. And so when you can find those resources, find that data, and show it to anyone who's resistant in your workplace to embracing these kinds of things, you will be able to gain some traction. I've also found that, if you are a CEO or an executive director or a manager or director, that when you model these things yourself, it's one thing to talk about it, you gotta be about it. And I'm guilty of that as well, right? So I'll say we should be doing these things, it's important, and then working an 80-hour work week or a 90-hour work week, and then letting my vacation pile up and not taking it. So when you say hard no's to things that you have to say no to, you model that behavior. If you are a leader in a position to do it, you'll start to see that your colleagues, your peers, they'll start to do the same. And then finally, I talked about this a little bit too, but I think it's really important that we make planning for. So being in the nonprofit business, we're in the business of planning. We have to plan. We have goals. We have objective key results. We have key performance indicators. So in the same way that we plan for how many youth we want to serve through our nonprofit, or how many people we want to lift out of poverty, let's plan to be deliberate about the ways that we incorporate work-life balance into our schedule. So as you build those plans for how many people you want to serve throughout the year, let's also think about what is it going to take to support the people that are doing that work, and how do we build that in as a part of that plan.
Awesome, absolutely. Making things data informed is so important in terms of battling these, urgency culture, white supremacist culture. Having the data to combat it can be a really useful tool in your arsenal. And also modeling the behavior that we want to see. All right, Brian is going to step out for 1 second. Just want to make sure, do we have any questions in the chat? Just to ask either of our panelists before we move into the breakout room portion of our day. you can feel free to, put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Awesome. Thank you, Sajid. Would love to hear the number one. Oh my gosh. Hi, Leah. Hi,
Say hi.
Leah. Oh, she's so cute.
Say hi, Leadership Fellows fan.
Oh, I'm so happy. Awesome. Okay, so we've got questions. All right, so let's start with Sachit's question. I would love to hear the number one value of modeling or whatever you have had at work that you would love to implement that you believe has helped tip the scales on work-life balance. This is a question for everybody. So if you have a response to Sachit, please do reply to her. Terrell has asked, nonprofit culture has been starting from a deficit and constantly playing catch up, but never actually catching up. Okay. Hybrid work schedule, edibles, got you. All right. Rosa says in response to Sachit that 6 months paid parental leave, implementing 6 months over 3 months. Got you. All right. Looks like we're having some good conversation. Okay. In that case, we'll proceed as planned with the breakout portion of the day. This group is going to break into groups of 5 to 6. Oh, and actually, since Brian is here with Leah, on a lighter note, since Brian spoke so much about the collective experience, Brian, how has your individual experience been? You are a new father. What have you been doing for your personal work-life balance? You mentioned, this whole thing with the vacation days and guilt. Were you able to take that vacation? How did that pan out for you?
Again, in the spirit of transparency and I think it's important that we also are okay with the idea of failure. I think that I failed at having work-life balance when it comes to this issue.
Oops.
Be excited to meet me. That's not too much. It's been a real challenge. So I worked for a nonprofit that was small before I landed the one where I'm at now. And so we didn't have, really clear policies around, fatherhood leave and what that was about. And so, there was just a lot of kind of back and forth in my previous organization about, well, what is my leave going to look like and how do I take it, right? And so I had to really kind of advocate for myself and be in a position where we establish those policies and make them clear. But I think, I kind of ran up against a lot of those ideas that do dads need time off to be with their children? And, that was something that was really tough for me, just initially to sort of advocate for my initial leave to begin with. And then on top of that, my wife, for those of you who don't know, is, she's in politics. And so, that also makes it a big challenge. And so, there's basically no leave for politicians. If you're a politician and you're a birthing individual, then you're just kind of expected to figure it out. And so that's also another challenge, right? And so that makes a challenge for both of us as parents that is really hard to overcome. And so, it's been a real uphill battle to get to a point where we can have the care that we need for this beautiful little ball of energy who's now like almost talking and almost walking and just growing a mile a minute. Who we love more than anything in the world. But I think, I'll conclude by saying this. I was reading this Audre quote, Audre Lorde quote, many of you all have seen it. I'm deliberate and afraid of nothing. And I just think about the fact that, as parents, as workers, as people who need to fight for these things around work-life balance, we have to be deliberate and unafraid. And so it might not all be laid out for you clearly and perfectly, but and it kind of goes back to what Sequoia was saying as well. What your values are. What's most important to you in your heart. And you have to continue to fight for and push for those things. So in that way, I hopefully haven't failed in my attempt to implement work-life balance, but in so many other ways, there've been failures, there've been challenges, but my hope is that I'm personally learning from those, and also that I'm bringing those into my leadership journey so that I can try to instill better systems and practices for those that I lead.
Thank you, Brian. Oh, it's so cute to see that Leah's so talkative. All right, before we move on, Donette, you've got a question?
Yeah, I guess it's a question / comment, because this is something I'm recently kind of experiencing. So just opening up as a comment to the group, or maybe there's a question in there too. Because I shared that our organization partners with Bright Horizons, which I've already kind of elevated for other colleagues who didn't even know we were partnering, if they ever had issues with childcare or, summer, especially now summer, and people are looking for school is out, what am I going to do with my job, but still trying to get to work because job doesn't stop during the summer. But something I experienced on the other side of that, as somebody who's considered young for my position as a director, is that because I do not have children, I'm always seen as I should be more accessible. And that's something that I've experienced as well, especially when the people I engage with will be communicating even at 8 p.m., 9 p.m. And I'm just holding up a boundary, but they're the ones with families. And I'm the one who's kind of seen as a childless person. So it's almost like this kind of expectation that, well, I have a family and I'm available, so you should even be more available. So I think sometimes that even makes it even more challenging to kind of I guess, justify you having boundaries, because it's the other person thinks of you just having a whole bunch of free time. So it seems, just wanted to add that comment as well, because holistically on both sides of the spectrum, it feels sometimes that the expectation is always the same of just being more available.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm hearing, what Brian is saying about being the father and non-birthing parent. People don't take your paid leave seriously. Also, not having children, again, people don't take your paid leave seriously. We have to move towards these cultures of actually valuing people as people, rather than, oh, here's the excuse you have for, to have free time or not have free time. So thank you all for that. Any other comments?
Yes, I wanted to follow up from the question in the chat that was asking for values or models, and just to refresh folks' memory about the question. I would love to hear the #1 value part modeling, whatever you have had at work or have heard of that you would love to implement, that you believe has helped tip the scales on work-life balance. And I responded that you can't prevent burnout as a value, and really connecting some of the things that Brian mentioned. If we know that, as people of color, or even, getting more specific to identifying as Black, a lot of our value is connected to our identity in the workplace. And so because of our identities, a lot of the times it is very difficult for us on that level to be able to express our needs. That comes from, a very, again, cultural place. It can come from a gendered place. And so with that in mind, along with things like capitalism and understanding systems, the nonprofit industrial complex, and so on and so forth, we know that these structures are inherently built around timelines, models that do not make space for things like relationship building, resisting urgency, so on and so forth. And so if you are in the mindset, if you have the value that you can't prevent burnout, what you are doing is acknowledging that we are operating within a system that doesn't make space for community care, so on and so forth. And so that will then, the hope is that it will drive us closer to implementing a culture of wellness. Because if we already know, that we can't prevent burnout, again, systems, identity, structure, so on and so forth, then we're coming to the table with, again, hopefully, solutions or openness to the needs that folks have. Because for me, it is very gaslighting to think that, a workshop is going to prevent burnout. Doing a staff retreat and some yoga is going to prevent burnout. Like, it doesn't prevent it. It can support it. It can create the space, to alleviate some of that. But burnout is inevitable.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sequoia. I agree so much with this concept of accepting failure and also acknowledging that burnout is inevitable. And so we have to focus on, how to address that. Brian, you had something you wanted to say?
No, sorry, that was Leah on the keyboard.
All right. Okay. I think we could keep going, but I do want us to have the breakout time just so everybody can engage with the conversation. And hopefully we can walk away with something, having made this thing at the end of the day. So are you all welcome to that? Moving into the small groups instead of continuing this larger discussion? Because I am open to continuing this larger discussion, but all right. So Janae has linked the Jamboard link in the chat. Janae, could you do that again? You can.
No problem.
All right.
1 second. And please let me know, everyone, if you have any trouble accessing it. I will adjust the access options.
Awesome. Okay, it's working for me at the very least. So I want you all to consider these questions that are on the Jamboard. I'm gonna put this long, thing in the chat. Save it to your own Word document if you need to. But here's the list, right? Sorry about that, Cynthia. Yes, please do manage your work-life balance. Sign off if you need to, but we're going to move into the breakout groups. Please, within your own group, appoint a record keeper who will be managing the discussion points and adding them to Jamboard, so that at the end of the day, we can walk away having created, this list of points to focus on. And each of the slides focuses on a different question. You can move from slide to slide within your groups. Does anybody have any questions about how to approach these discussion topics or usage of the Jamboard? Awesome. Okay. Since I think we're good, you guys have the questions, you guys have Jamboard. If you need anything, please do email me or anything or any other way to reach me. You can also pop out here. I'll be in the room. But I'm going to open up these rooms now. You can all go into the small groups and appoint a record keeper to add to the Jamboard. Awesome. See you all soon.